So first I create a base of acrylic paint that sets the foundation for the rest of the painting. I use less intense tones to create a backdrop that would help bring out the other colors further once I start adding the oil paints. The background is obviously the furthest from the viewer, and so I try to use lighter and paler shades that would help add more contrast once I add darker and bolder colors. Okay, so now that the acrylics layer is dry, it's time to bring out the oil paints. I'm going to start off by working on this tree on the left, which has a yellowish color. I'm going to start adding some shading to it to add another layer to it. I'm using yellow, brown, gray, and white to add variety to my color. When you're painting plants especially, you have to think a lot about depth, and this is going to involve having 3 or more layers of paint to give these trees and some other plants that three-dimensional shape that brings them out. I'm using 2 different brushes for this, a small shader and a fan brush, just for a variety of brush strokes. So with this layer, I'm using various darker shades of yellow to make those shadows inside the leaves of the tree. I'm mixing both on the canvas and on the palette. Some of the dark spots are bigger than others, and that's necessary to add variety to the random shapes and sizes of the shadows inside the trees. Another important thing is that once you finish adding this layer, wait until the paint dries at least somewhat so that the next layer can be applied without overmixing the paint. So here I'm just finishing darkening up some of the trees. I use a darker shade of the tree's base color. An important part of this is to make sure to mix the colors well onto the canvas, so you won't be able to see any obvious brush strokes on the canvas. Just reapply a small amount of the base color using oil paint and allow that to blend in with the edges of the darker colors. But don't go overboard with the mixing, otherwise the mixture would become too muddy and lack contrast. Okay, so now that the paint is dry, I'm ready to add the third layer of paint. I'm going back to the yellow tree. The colors I'm using are yellow, white, gray, and brown. I don't directly use yellow because that color is way too vivid and the tree would look too unrealistic. Use the other colors to desaturate the yellow, so add a small amount of gray or brown to the yellow to dial down the intensity, but make sure to keep the color light. The important thing to remember here is maintaining the contrast so that the shadows will bring out the brightness of the leaves that come out. I use both the fan brush and the small shader in painting this, and pretty much for the rest of the painting. I don't paint the leaves individually, but rather clusters of them. I use a variety of yellow shades to add variety. This is true in all layers because having only one type of yellow makes it look too monotone. Try to slightly adjust the yellow color with the other colors I mentioned. So when I work on the furthest trees in the background, I use as little contrast as possible, and that's both with the shades and the color. The further something is, the less intensity it will have with color and shade, so I'm keeping the colors as close as possible to the base color of the tree. So now I'm finishing adding the darker layer over the acrylic layer. I'm using both dark colors along with some light colors to blend it all together. I'm using all the same principles for the rest of the painting, adding a third layer of paint over everything, sometimes going back over some areas that I didn't like.